Well, here we are. I'm going to be talking on positive emotion as part of this series of stories that illustrate the 5 aspects of the spiritual life. So the spiritual life, the path, it can be divided into these 5 aspects. We've looked at integration. We're in the positive emotion series at the moment, but they're not one after another. They're not linear. They can all happen every day. You might experience some integration. You might experience some positive emotion. They're more like the petals of a flower unfolding than a kind of linear path. So the positive emotion can also be called skillful intention, which comes from the Sanskrit kusala karma. So skillful intention is quite a good way of expressing it because it goes beyond how we feel. So positive emotion might sound like it's about how we feel, that we want to experience really good states of mind all the time, which of course is important that we do that. But this is saying that actually what's important is that we're connecting beyond ourselves with our positive emotion. So last week, Vidania gave that very inspiring talk about Ananda, the companion of the Buddha, and really brought out Ananda's selflessness, his friendliness, his warmth, his kindness, and most of all, his reverence and willingness to serve the Buddha. And this week, we're moving on to compassion. And I'm going to tell 2 stories, which are both more about compassion for what maybe we don't like naturally, or that we even find distasteful. So it's about having compassion, perhaps for things that it's not such a lovely emotion. It's more an intention that we wish well. So as I said, we've got 2 stories tonight. One is mythic from a long time ago. The other is from the 1980s. So the first is the story of Asanga. And Asanga is from the 4th century in the Common Era. He was in India, up in the north of India. And he was a very famous figure in Buddhist history. Him and his half-brother, who was called Vasubandhu, both really great philosophers of Buddhist thought. But it's Asanga we're concentrating on today, and it's a mythic story about him. So Asanga was a very keen meditator and very devoted to a figure called Maitreya. And we do actually have a statue of Asanga that Edward is going to show. So this is a Chinese wood carving of Asanga. So this is a kind of impression of what the artist thought Asanga might look like. And Asanga was very dedicated, very devoted to the Bodhisattva or Buddha Maitreya, who we also have a picture of. Yeah, so Maitreya, again, a stone carving. And this is actually a stone carving from the Gandharva epoch, which is when Asanga was alive and was what he was practicing under. So Maitreya is a really interesting archetypal figure, both a Buddha, so the Buddha to be, the future Buddha, when the teaching of our Buddha just dies out in this world, the story goes that Maitreya will come and he will pick up the Dharma again and teach it again. But he's also a bodhisattva as well. He's a bodhisattva of golden light. His name means friendly one, so he's about compassion, friendliness. And Asanga took on a practice which is about connecting himself with this embodiment of Maitreya, this embodiment of transcendental wisdom and compassion in this being of light. And it's a practice that's very common in Indo-Tibetan traditions. And actually, most order members on ordination take on a practice to bring to mind a similar figure to Maitreya. So he really wanted to connect with Maitreya, and he really wanted to have the experience of seeing him, of not just thinking about him, but of seeing him. So he went into retreat to do that. And during that retreat, he practiced really intensely. He was in a cave up in the hills. He didn't see anybody. People just brought him food, not much food. And he just, was meditating. He was chanting, probably wasn't sleeping very much, doing a lot of studying, but just really yearning to see Maitreya, really yearning to see him. But after 3 years of this intense practice, nothing had happened. He hadn't seen Maitreya at all. So he thought, I've had enough of this, and he came out of his retreat. But as he was walking down the hill, he saw a person who was using a thread to make a mark, a cut in a metal nail. And actually he had the patience that he was using a thread in this kind of way to make this mark. And Asanga thought, well, if that person has that patience, and what I want is actually to see Maitreya, this amazing figure, I can go back into retreat and I can have more patience. So we went back in, and another 3 years passes of this intense practice, and yet nothing at all. So he came out of the meditation, out of the retreat, and as he was walking down, he got a little bit further down, but he noticed a space where water was dripping onto stone, and it had caused a hollow. It had caused a hollow in the rock, as water does. Water's so soft, isn't it? And yet it could carve away a hole in the rock. And he thought, well, if water can do that, the patience of just drip after drip of water, I can do it too. So he went back into his retreat. So another 3 years passes, and you're kind of guessing probably where we're going. It's like, no, he had no sign of Maitreya at all. So he came out of his retreat, and as he was walking down, he saw an eagle flying in and out of a hole up in the caves. And I kind of imagine it's this limestone country, actually, with this water on the stone and these caves. And he saw this eagle going in and out. And he thought that if an eagle flies in and out and its wing brushes against the stone enough, it will mark the stone. It will take the stone away. So he thought, if the eagle can do it, I can do it. So he went back into his retreat. So another 3 years passes. So it's 12 years in all, and nothing has happened. And this time he just thought, right, I'm really out of here. This is such a waste of my time and my life. I'm going down to the town. I'm going to go to the nearest town. So he went all the way down. And as he was walking along the road, not far from the town, he saw that lying on the side of the road was a dog that had been hurt, a dog that was in distress with a really bad leg, a really horrible wound in her leg. So he went over to the dog, and he saw that in the horrible wound, which was like really disgusting, there were loads of maggots. Maggots had hatched in it, and it was really gross. Okay, but he thought, what I need to do is clean this wound, and I need to take the maggots out. And then he thought, but if I take the maggots out to help the dog and I just throw them away, these maggots will die. These maggots need something to eat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve a little bit of flesh out of myself, out of my leg, put that down, and then I can put the maggots on that flesh so that they will have food. So then he thought, okay, I'm going to take the maggots out. But he realized that if he used his fingers, he was going to damage the maggots. They were very delicate. He was going to damage them. So he knelt down and he put his tongue into the wound. And one by one, he took the maggots out and put them on the piece of flesh that he'd cut out of his leg. And as he was taking the maggots out, the dog just disappeared, and in front of him was Maitreya in all his glory, in all his golden light, his magnificence, this huge figure of compassion. And quite understandably, after I think he's got over his shock, Asanga said to the figure of Maitreya, I've been wanting to see you for 12 years. Where have you been? What have you been doing, kind of thing? And Maitreya said, well, I was there every day. I was there with you in the cave, but you couldn't see me. It's not until this moment when you were able to go beyond yourself for compassion for the dog, compassion for the maggots, that you were able to see me. So there's a little end of the story that I'll just say, which is that Maitreya said, well, actually, other people won't be able to see me. If they don't have your compassion, your faith, they won't be able to see me if you go into the town. So Asanga did pick up Maitreya and took him into the town. And nobody could see him at all. Even though he was carrying this glorious figure, nobody could see him. The only person who noticed anything was an old woman who saw that he was carrying a dog. So she had a little bit of a kind of clearer mind, clearer vision, compassion, and she could at least see the dog. Okay, so what does this story say to you? Well, the interesting thing about stories is they will say different things to different people. But for me, there's two things I particularly want to pull out tonight. So the first is that if we crave big experiences and wisdom, like seeing Maitreya in all his glory, we're only going to actually see those when we have the compassion, when we have the wisdom to go beyond ourselves. So in a way, my Asanga was yearning for this big experience. It was quite a kind of self thing. I want to see this figure. It was only when he could go beyond himself with such kindness that Maitreya actually appeared for him. And the second is that I think it shows that compassion is expressed in action, is expressed concretely in our relationships with people and other sentient beings. So it's really, really vital that we do meditate. Meditation will change our habitual mindsets, but it is in our relationships with other people that we express our compassion. It was important for Maitreya that he spent those, for Sangha, that he spent those 12 years up in the cave meditating, but it was when he was actually in connection with another living being that he expressed his compassion. So this level of compassion, well, for me, is far off, far away, in a very literal kind of way. I know that when I've been in India on pilgrimages, I've seen lots of dogs. They still have lots of feral dogs there, and some of them in quite distress, a lot of distress, and I actually haven't helped them. You know, I've just seen them and kind of gone on my way. I see people in distress here in the streets, and I don't help them either. And I certainly don't help maggots. You know, that's, I don't find myself naturally able to have compassion to maggots. So I thought I'd tell another story as well, which is a little bit closer to the current day. And this is a story of a woman called Jill Nalder, or Nailder. So she's about, we could have a picture of her. So she's alive now, she's about 60, she's just a few years older than me. Oh, the other one, please. This is about a giveaway of my, there she is, so that's her. She's an actress, so I think that's one of those shots they do have for actors. Anyway, she's about 60 now, but back in the early 80s, she left Wales, where she's from, and she moved to London with a group of friends from her theatre school that she'd been at in South Wales. And quite a few of her friends were young gay men. And they all moved in together in London into what they called the Pink Palace. And basically, people had a lot of fun. So those were, I remember those days, and they were not easy days in some ways. There was quite a lot of prejudice still against gay men and lesbians. And people had come from probably quite small towns, from quite difficult situations, and they came to London and they had a lot of fun, a lot of joy, and a lot of freedom. And some of that freedom included quite a lot of sex, so quite a lot of promiscuity that probably from here, where we are now, quite amazing, but certainly that was the times. Okay, so people, there was this joy in the air, there's lots of things going on, but there was a shadow. There was a shadow, and the shadow was that a lot of the of gay men were starting to get ill with really strange symptoms that the doctors didn't understand. First of all, in the United States, and then it came to the UK. And Jill realized that quite a few of her friends had kind of gone out of contact. She didn't know where they were. So she did chase them up and realized that a few men had got ill and they'd been taken home by their parents, or else they'd just gone underground. They'd just kind of gone out of contact. They didn't want to be in contact with people because it was very terrifying at the time, having these symptoms that people didn't understand that were a death sentence. People didn't understand what was going on. And there was a lot of stigma around as well. Yeah, it was a time where there was a lot of prejudice and fear. And the prejudice that was in society around gay men meant that people who were, that the gay men who were suffering from AIDS, as it was sometimes treated really badly by their own parents, by the doctors, by the system. But Jill supported her friends in many ways. She, very practically, she took them food when they were ill. She looked after them. She went with them to hospital appointments. And then she eventually would go and visit people in hospital when they were dying. And you'll have guessed that for many of you that I'm talking about Jill Nalder, who is the inspiration for the series It's a Sin, which is on Channel 4 at the moment. Yeah, so she's the real character. So if we had the other picture, that is the actress. So that's Jill back in the day, back in the 1980s, and that's the actor who plays her in the series now. Okay. Anyway, so what happens in the series, there's this amazing scene, I found it very moving, very shocking actually, where it's in a hospital ward. And there's a long corridor, and off the corridor, there are lots of rooms, lots of doors to lots of rooms. And in each room, there's a young man dying, often alone. So there's just so many men in there just dying alone. They're boys, they're just young men. And Jill realized that some men were just all on their own, and she took up visiting the guys that didn't have any family to visit them. And she was working at that time in a musical in Les Miserables. And so what she could do was go and visit them in the morning, do her performance in the evening, and then often go after that as well to see them as well. So she just brought a lot of compassion in very practical terms to a group of people who are facing quite a lot of prejudice. And she also raised a lot of money. The charity that she founded has raised over £1 million up to today. And nowadays, most of the money goes to people in Africa, so people with AIDS in Africa. So she made a massive difference. And again, I don't think I'm yet at that stage to be as naturally compassionate as Jill was, as naturally generous as she was to her friends. But I really believe that we can develop this positive emotion of compassion. And that's what the Buddha said, that if we work with the law of karma, we can in ourselves become much more compassionate. We can widen our circle of compassion. Because it's quite easy, isn't it? If somebody, if a child was in a pond in front of us drowning, we would do what we could to pull them out. We'd probably risk our lives. It would be quite simple. When a friend is in need, it's quite easy for me to respond. But we all have boundaries that our compassion stops at. And I think it's really interesting to look at, well, where are those boundaries? Where do we stop feeling compassion for people? And I think that's a very human thing to feel like that, because I think we've kind of, there's like the in-tribe, which we're part of, and then there's the others, the out-tribe, the people not in the tribe. And I think it's just part of our makeup that we do concentrate on the in-tribe and feel that other people are somehow not as important as the people in the in-tribe. But those, they are, who's in the in-tribe and who's in the out-tribe is also very culturally created. So for instance, it's of its time. So in the 80s, gay men with AIDS for some people were part of that out group. But now hopefully there's not so much stigma. Hopefully in most workplaces in the UK anyway, people might be able to be out. Now I know that's not true in every place, but it has come a long way since the early 80s. And I think from Asanga's story, which is what makes it so powerful, is that he cares for the maggots. That's what makes it so powerful for me. And although I might not be able to care for maggots in that way, I certainly think that animals are cared for better now. Vegetarianism, veganism is much more common, much more mainstream than it was in the 80s. So things change. And these, hopefully these circles of compassion do widen. So I was thinking for myself, where is an example of where I have, I kind of find sort of a boundary coming up. And I think I've got a bit of a one around people who think differently from me politically. So my conditioning is very much a kind of lefty liberal kind of-ness from my parents, actually, and also this from when I was at university and when I was growing up. And I kind of just absorbed that without thinking too much about it and kind of always thought I was right. So for instance, when I come across people who have very different political views from me, I find it quite challenging. An example for me would be Brexit. So there are people that I really respect and care for who are members of the Buddhist order, Buddhists, who voted for Brexit. Whereas for me, of course, with my conditioning, I'm just like a natural European. That's what makes sense to me. So even though intellectually it's really important to me that everybody is welcome at the Buddhist Centre, whatever people's political views are. In fact, more than that, that it's really important that here we can show and exemplify a place where everybody can come and with whatever their views are, and that we can be in harmony with each other. We might not agree and we might need to discuss that, but we can be in harmony. Emotionally, sometimes it's not so easy. I can feel that when somebody has quite a different political view from me, I can feel myself setting up a bit of a barrier against them, a bit of a like, oh no, not again kind of feeling. So that's something that I've had to work with. Probably for all of us, COVID regulations are a great one for setting up these kind of them and us situations, I think. Wherever it is you are on that kind of sliding scale of really keenly following the regulations, or maybe just being a little bit loose with them, it's like people do have views, don't we? It's like, you know, we can find people who follow the regulations more than we do, a little bit frustrating. We can find people who follow the regulations less than we do, scary and frightening, and then we get really anxious. And again, we can kind of cut off from them. I'm sure that you have all got your own stories about feeling that with somebody. And quite often in the groups on a Sangha night, people would report in on when they'd been out and they'd had a certain experience and how they'd felt about that, and a kind of disconnection, a lack of compassion. Because it's important that compassion for someone doesn't mean that you agree with what they do or how they behave. Okay, you might really disagree, but what you're not doing is disconnecting from their humanity, from them as another human being with the potential to become a Buddha. Every human being has that potential. So, what to do to develop more compassion, to widen our circle of compassion, to connect with people, with animals as well, with all beings, even if they go beyond what we find personally acceptable, I suppose. So the first, of course, is the metta bhavana, that wonderful, amazing practice, which we're going to do again tonight. In a bit, Maitri will lead us in that. And we can do that in meditation, and we can do that out of meditation. There's a great phrase that I really like, which is guerrilla metta bhavana, which is when you just like, you're out on the street, you see that person, maybe with a mask, maybe without a mask, whatever it is that gets you going, and you send them metta, and maybe a bit of metta for yourself as well. And in that, develop a sense of compassion for them and for yourself, so that you're connecting with them as a human being. So I think metta off the cushion is a really powerful practice, actually. And one to practice, I used to practice it every day on my way to work. Just walking to work, I'd kind of think, everybody I meet, whether I like them, don't have an opinion about them, or dislike them, I'm going to send them some metta and just kind of train myself in that way. So the second is a wisdom practice, which is just to reflect on the conditions that lead us to behave in the way that we do. We're so much a product of our culture. I have no idea what I would have been like if I had been born to a Nazi family, or I'd been born to white supremacists in the United States. It's really hard to know what you would do, because we are just the product of our conditions. So there's something about, if we reflect on that, there's a way to have, to build up a sense of compassion with other people. I am rushing through these a bit, but you can talk about them in the groups. So the third one, which is I really like, is copying other people. So occasionally I find people who behave in a way that's so full of compassion and so very, very quick to react to somebody who's suffering. And it's not a natural thing for me, actually. I hold back, I'm quite reserved. And I kind of sometimes think, oh God, this person isn't going to even want me to be kind of being compassionate to them. Why would they want that? Or I just feel shy or a bit awkward, or it's just like not my natural thing to do. So I've been observing a few people in the Sangha who do that naturally. So Mogavansa, Maitri, Sangha Gita, people who just come forward to people when they're suffering. And I've just been copying what they do. And it's quite good, actually. It's quite easy. It's like quite an easy way to practice. And I think that leads on to the fourth one that I'm suggesting, which is act as if you were already compassionate. So this occurred to me when somebody was talking to me about their visiting an elderly parent, and they had a very difficult relationship with their elderly parent all their lives, and they weren't feeling particularly compassionate. They were feeling quite annoyed with the person, but they still went and sat down, talked to them, and were very kind to their parent. But they were kind of criticizing themselves, saying, I know I go, but I just feel so irritated. I hate the way it makes me feel afterwards. And I just suddenly thought, it's just amazing that you're going. Don't give yourself such a hard time. Just rejoice in the fact that you're doing that, you're visiting your parent. Of course, it's better if we feel the compassion, that's much better, but maybe we don't, and maybe we just act as if we are compassionate, and that will help us to gradually become more and more compassionate. So a little bit of a kind of quick run through this whole area, which is massive, of course, but just to summarize, I feel like, the positive emotion of compassion might not feel particularly lovely when we're actually acting compassionately. And it might too, actually. It might feel a sense of warmth and friendliness, but it might not, because it's not about how we feel. What it's about is that we are connecting to somebody else or to another being, and that we can trust that if we practice that, we practice the metta bhavana, we practice reflecting, we can trust to the law of karma that we will become more compassionate, like Jill was compassionate, like Asanga. And like Asanga, we'll see Maitreya one day. And I'm going to finish with a poem, if I can find it, which is by Maitreya Bandhu. And Maitreya Bandhu is an order member and a poet, a very distinguished poet from London. And this is a poem that he's written that's called Asanga. When Asanga came down from his mountain cave, 12 years that had achieved nothing, he saw a dog, a miserable thing, abandoned, whipped, with a suppurating sore that crawled with maggots and blowflies. He knelt, and with his tongue he moved the maggots one by one, to a lump of his own flesh that he had cut away. And suddenly Maitreya stood before him, saying, I have been with you all this time. Every day I came to your cave among the snows. Carry me on your shoulders to the marketplace, and you will see how, unless the eye of faith has opened, I will pass unnoticed there. They went among the cabbages and chickpeas, and no one noticed Maitreya in his majesty, the bent old monk, or the dog that trotted by his side.